I bet 90% of you play your Republican games completely inefficient. I'm the student, and here are the 5 reasons why. And before I start with the first reason of that, let me actually tell you what I'm actually talking about, because I'm talking about the difference about, re-electing your ruler with election events, and on the other side, the sortition reform, where you elect your rulers from a sortition event once your previous ruler dies. And I'm actually going to put the 5 reasons into a comparison of what the sortition does with that and what the re-election does with that. And then in the end, you're going to see what way comes out on top. And let me just start right away with the first reason, which is age, because I think most people would think that the sortition rulers are way older and therefore die way faster than the re-elected rulers, or the rulers that you can re-elect on time, right? Now, that is true because the sortition has a scripted age of between 50 and 72, which, the expected value would be, 62.5. So most rulers elected by the sortition event will be around 62 years old, okay? Now, let me just roll a few rulers on Genoa real quick. So let's see. This one is 34, quite young. This one is 57. So honestly, a sortition election candidate could have been the same age over here. The third candidate, 35 again. The fourth one, 37. The fifth one, 46, 44, 42, 56. Okay, and you can see with the last one, 56 already, and the previous ones, those are not 20-year-old rulers, those are not 30-year-old rulers, they are more like around 40 to 50-year-old rulers. The reason for that is that the age of these normal elected rulers are completely random, so they can be 15 years old, but they can also be 80 years old, okay? Which means that the expected value again here would be around 47 years, right? So most people that you elect with the election event will be around 47 years old. Now the interesting part comes with the life expectancy, right? A ruler that comes to the rule with 47 years of age lives on average until he's 63 years old, so on average 16 years of reign. The sortition rulers are of course much older, but they have this plus 25% average monarch lifespan modifier, which lets them live longer, which means in the end, even though on average they are 62 years old on the beginning of their reign, they still live on average until like 72, so around 10 years, which is literally, there is not much difference between 10 years and 16 years, considering that the lower age might be the biggest argument for most people to not take the sortition, okay? So that is not as big of an argument as you might think. So let's get right into the second reason why sortition is actually the better choice, which is focused stats. You see, if a ruler dies in a normal republic, you have, of course, these 3 options of focused candidates for an admin-focused guy, a diplo-focused guy, and a mil-focused guy, okay? Now he has then a 4 in that focused category and a 1 in each of the other categories. That is literally scripted right here, right? Now, let me just enact the sortition over here and trigger that same event for the sortition in this case. You can see this is a slightly different event. You have also 3 guys to elect, but also the lottery. I'm going to talk about that later. But you can see that he has also focus rulers. You can see that he has over here, that admin focus guy has a 5 in admin. That diplo focus guy has a 6 in diplo, and that mil focus guy has a 5 in mil. Okay, so there are also focuses in the election event for the sortition. But the big difference is that they have an average of 5 already, but you can already see right at the bottom there that all skills of the elected rulers changed by 1, which means that these focused rulers have in their focus category literally an average of 6 stat. Okay, literally an average of 6 stat in their focused category, which means that the focused stats thing is actually way better in the election of the the sortition than it is in the normal election. Next up, for the third reason, let me talk about the average Republican tradition spent per 10 years. Per 10 years because, as I said, the average lifespan of such a sortitioned elected ruler is 10 years. So actually that's what we are talking about, right? Because that means that on average, if you choose one, for example, if you want to have this one over here, this mill focus guy, you will have to pay 25 Republican tradition, which seems a lot, right? But it is, as I said, on average only for 10 years. Now, a re-election, of course, costs 2.5 Republican tradition per election cycle, okay? Which means that if you have 4 election terms, it costs you 10 Republican tradition to re-elect, okay? And now you can just calculate it, how much would you spend if you re-elect them 3 times for 10 years, right? And of course, let's just calculate you re-elect them like 2.5 times, right? Because the last 2 years are only 2 years. But that means that literally it is 10 for the first re-election, 10 for the second re-election, so 20, and then half of that, so 5 for the third re-election for the next 2 years. So literally also exactly 25 Republican tradition that you pay for re-electing, which is the exact same amount of Republican tradition spent as you would spend on the sortition thing. And funnily enough, if you have a 3 years election term, so if you got, this frequent elections thing over here, you actually pay more Republican tradition because you would pay a rounded up price of 8 per re-election, which would be then in total 27 for 10 years, right? So that would be even worse in terms of Republican tradition. And you have to keep in mind that if all of these rulers are as strong as they are, for example, I wouldn't mind having each of these guys, right? Then you can always just let the lottery decide and you literally pay 0 Republican tradition for getting one of these great guys to be elected, okay? So this is really a way more efficient way to deal with Republican tradition than just re-electing rulers. Now let's go for the fourth reason, which is probably the most interesting one, which is a little bit mathematically calculating thing, but it is about the average monarch power per 16 years. And 16 years in this case, because 16 years is the average monarch lifespan of a ruler without the sortition event. So as I had before, as I said, they are on average 47 years old, so they live on average 16 years, and therefore you're of course going to re-elect them every 4 years or every 3 years, and therefore gain more stats, and therefore start with a lower mana generation but end up with a higher mana generation on average, maybe, but we're going to see how it adds up in total, because in total that means that for a fast re-election circle of 4 years, where you re-elect your ruler every single time and he lives 16 years long, you will generate 2,218 overall mana, okay? If you have a 3-year election cycle, you will generate 2,518 mana, okay? And now let's compare that to the sortition, right? Now, as I said, the sortition rulers have an average of 5 in the focus category and an average of 2 in each of the other categories, right? So he's normally a 5-2-2 on average, you know, or a 2-5-2, and you get the point, right? But he also gets a skill bonus, as you can see down there, on every single skill just by electing him. So actually in the end that means that he has an average of 6-3-3 stats, okay, which is already 12, okay. Now if you assume that you can literally choose the best one overall, so for example in this case this one over here, you can of course, you know, you have 3 choices, so it's actually relatively likely that you get at least one that is above average even. You are most likely to have more than 12 points even, which means let's just calculate with, in this case, you know, in this case it would be really strong, but let's just calculate that on average you get a slightly above average guy which has 13 stats on average, right? If you can choose the best one always, right? Which you can because you pay the same Republican tradition, as I said, as re-electing. Then you would actually do the same amount of 2,500 mana that the 3 years election term did. The same amount of generated mana. So if you ever ask yourself, what is better? No, the 3 years election term is not better than a sortition, and the 4 years election term is actually a lot worse than sortition. And now let's get to the final part, to the 5th reason why sortition is actually better than a normal republic, which are 2 additional extra points that I just wanted to point out, which is that the tier 1 reforms with a longer election term, as I said already, for example an Italian Signoria which has 12 years of election term, or for example a noble elite with 8 years, those are way worse than sortition if you just keep re-electing them, right? Which means that if you go for the re-election type of republic, you cannot choose these tier 1 reforms that have longer election circles, even though you probably would like to have them, for example the Italian Signoria, that actually has pretty nice modifiers, as for example the tax cost, the royal marriage allowance, and the additional re-election from family members, right? So you want to have these reforms, they are pretty strong normally, but you cannot choose them if you want to re-elect, because then the re-election circle would be too long. So sortition actually allows you to have whatever tier 1 republic reform you want, because it literally doesn't matter what election term it has. The second additional reason is that there is a way higher risk without sortition for your ruler to die actually, because if your ruler, for example, has a pretty bad stat and you want to re-elect him, you have to wait until the circle is over and then re-elect another one with only 6 monarch points. And if he dies before the 16 years average, then you of course also lose mana compared to the sortition. Whereas the sortition, if you have a really bad ruler to choose, so for example all of these rulers over here are really not that great, right? All you have to do right now is let the lottery decide. You literally paid 0 Republican tradition for that, and now what you can do is make your ruler a general, and as he is so old, within 5 years the general death chance comes to a point which, in combination with his old age, lets him literally die consistently after 5 years of making him a general. And then you can re-elect another ruler, and you keep in mind this one has 8 stats. Okay, this is already 2 stats better than a 4-1-1 or 1-4-1, right? So it's just that the re-election thing is a way higher risk, as it is a way higher commitment to just one ruler that has to live 16 years for it to pay off. Whereas the lottery is way less RNG dependent, as you can of course choose between 3 different ones. So even if you have a really bad choice, as you can see over here, you can still choose the best one of these. For example, this one in this case, 226 is still way better than a 114, right? And then even if you have such a bad ruler, you can just always not pay any Republican tradition, make him a general, let him die early, and try again. the chances are just on your side if you choose the sortition. And as you already saw in the fourth reason, the mana generation is actually on average literally higher with the sortition government reform than with a normal republic. So I hope you enjoyed this little talk about republics here, and yeah, we are going to see either on the next Wednesday at Parabellum or, as always, on the next Monday.